Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Management Diaries. I'm your host, Denile Doyle. This is MHN's property management podcast, where we get into the real side of property management, from what's working in leasing and maintenance to the resident experience to leadership lessons and everything in between. My guest today is basically a powerhouse in multifamily. Diane Batayeh is the CEO of Village Green, and Diane has guided the 100-year-old company through market changes, evolving renter priorities, a lot of different things in the number of decades that she's been with the company. So today, Diane and I will talk about what it takes to lead such a legacy organization, about how to balance resident expectations with owners and investors' goals, and about what residents want beyond great amenities. Diane, welcome to Management Diaries. Thanks so much for joining me.
Well, thank you, Danielle. I'm really excited to be with you today. I'm looking forward to the conversation.
I mentioned you've been with Village Green for a really long time, and I always love hearing origin stories from my guests. So, can you tell us about your start there?
I don't know how many multifamily professionals you've spoken to that have been in the business for more than 4 decades, but those of us who are, I would say, dinosaurs in the business always have a story connected to I tripped into the business. It was never sort of something I had planned to do. And today it's obviously very different. There are educational programs and college curriculum centered on our industry, which I think is great. The time I joined was back in 1980. I was attending the University of Michigan. And my goal at that point was to go into law and ultimately community service. I thought I would someday be in politics. I'm happy that things didn't turn out that way. I actually grew up in the city of Detroit, inner city, southwest side, a family of immigrants. My parents had 7 children. There were 6 girls and 1 boy. He came last. Of course, he was the golden child. And so my parents' idea of success for us was find a man with great health insurance and get married. And that was it. So when I decided I'm going to college, and that's a story all in and of itself on how I convinced them to allow me to do that, I was very interested in giving back to the community, community service, making a difference, having grown up with a generally underprivileged background. And so I was really determined to do that. Off to school at University of Michigan, I didn't have the luxury of having a lot of money and my way paid for, so I had to have a job. Back then, there were the want ads that you look through to find jobs. And I was going through the want ads one day. I saw a listing for a part time leasing agent. Like, what the heck is that? I called the number. It was a 20-minute phone interview, and I got hired on the spot. And the address where I was going to show up was the building in which I lived, North Campus of Ann Arbor. That was the beginning of my career at Village Green. 45 years later, here I am at the helm of the company. There's a lot that happened in between, but that's how I tripped into the business.
You know, what's really fascinating is that you always had that love and desire to be in community service, right? From the start, community service was just always something that you felt called to.
Absolutely. And I have a platform today that I can absolutely leverage to do just that. Today at Village Green, we have a philanthropic division called V Gives, and we're partnered with local nonprofits like the Ronald McDonald House Charities, among others. And we also give back to the communities by virtue of time. All of our employees are encouraged. Every year they get 8 hours of service time, and we encourage them to do whatever you're passionate about, give back your way. I think that multiplier effect, Danielle, goes such a long way. Everybody can make a difference. I'm doing it a different way, but nonetheless, I think it's impactful.
Yeah, I agree, Diane. Giving of your time, every time we volunteer, every time we serve, it makes a difference. And I can see how that kind of mentality, I can already see how that shaped your leadership. So early lessons are often the ones that stick with us, right? Sometimes it's something that's surprising that'll stick with us. It might be something less positive, but a lesson nonetheless that will stick with us? What's a lesson that kind of taught you this rule or practice that you've really just stuck with and continue to follow today?
Sure. I do share this with everyone that I mentor. The lesson of getting comfortable being uncomfortable. It started for me leaving the inner city, my cocoon of my small family unit, the fear that was instilled in me of going kind of outside that. It took courage and it took being very uncomfortable to go against the grain. Heading off to college was step one. There were many that followed that. 45 years ago, female executives in the multifamily space were very limited. It's very different today, but then it was not the norm. It was very uncomfortable going into meetings where you were the lone female, presenting in front of city councils and not having a whole lot of experience doing that. That was extremely uncomfortable. I always think about when you have a loss, that L should be viewed as a lesson and not a loss necessarily. And I tell people when you're going into something new, expect to make mistakes, expect to have those losses that will be turned into lessons, but always make fresh mistakes. Like don't repeat them because I think there's a lot of value in that. So those are the things that really stuck with me and throughout the entire course of my career, everything I've done that's been new or taking on something extraordinarily challenging that I maybe didn't think I could do, but did it anyway. And there are so many different examples, Danielle, of getting uncomfortable and then just doing it anyway.
It's really like pushing past that feeling, right?
Absolutely.
You've basically done that numerous times. The starting point was going off to college, and then I imagine then after that, after you were successful at that, you kind of said, "Oh, okay, well, it wasn't easy. It felt maybe a little intimidating, but it was fine. I was fine, right?"
That's right. I mean, I was an actress, I'll call it. I learned to compartmentalize and not necessarily show that anxiety, feel it inside. Although I'll say I didn't always hide it well. The first time I had to get up on stage in front of a group, visibly shaking. And when I got off, someone like looked at me with such pity, giving me a pat on the back. The more you do it, the less uncomfortable it becomes. And then you just have to keep honing yourself by taking on that next challenge and the next challenge. And then over the course of time, Danielle, it becomes less frightening to take on something new. You become a better actress. You can sort of compartmentalize your fear because I think public speaking is another great example. I had to get very comfortable doing that. It was terrifying, and everyone has a fear of public speaking. No matter what they say, and no matter how many times you do it, you feel those butterflies. And just sort of taking on that challenge regardless. It takes courage, it takes experience and tripping up and knowing that you're going to be okay even after you've done that. In the moment, it's very difficult. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you, Danielle, that it was such an easy road for me because it was by far not that. For many younger people in the industry today, I just want to reassure them do it, take the plunge. It doesn't matter if you trip up, you're going to be better for it. You'll never regret it, no matter how many mistakes you make along the way.
And I feel like you'll also, to your point, your confidence, right? After
That's
that
right.
first time, you'll build your confidence. And then
Right.
each time,
That's exactly right. It's a different profession as well, in that, like being a lawyer or a doctor, there's a very set path of education and experience, your residency, your internship, and what have you. In our space, it's really not that straightforward until you've actually been in the trenches. Every experience is going to be different. Every asset's different. Every ownership group's different. Every capital raise is different. And so, really, it's the only way to learn it is through experience.
let's pivot to residents, right? What residents are saying and what's on their mind. How do you go about gathering feedback, whether it's surveys or any other means? And are there any insights that you were surprised about? And what comes to mind when you think about that feedback
Sure.
that you've gotten?
Well, first, let me say it's really changed over the decades how you gather that feedback, the veracity of that feedback, what you do with that feedback. It's really been a moving target. So let me start by taking you back in time when it was a little more straightforward, right? You'd send out a resident survey, maybe you get 25% engagement, and that was considered okay. You'd have a set group of questions and then kind of open, what else would you like to share? And that really helped position the industry around the sorts of amenities and services from a physical plant perspective and a service perspective. And it really did help developers in particular create those buildings and keep up with what the demand was, such as the Nest systems that you now see, the Wi Fi that's now sort of a given versus an amenity. Communal spaces and the like, right? When pets became something that everybody had to accommodate. And now it's like they're your children and you have to have them in the building. So back then it was a little easier and a little bit more objective in that you didn't feel as exposed. Let's put it that way. So since the days of social media and the days of more reputation management, intentional reputation management, knowing that your brand can be destroyed in an instant through social media, that's created this environment of vulnerability around our industry like never before. Today, I think reputation management is far more important than surveys that you send out to residents. We use what's called touch point surveys. Touch point surveys, if you think about buying a vehicle, you go in to look at a vehicle, you get a survey. You go in, you buy a vehicle, you get a survey. You go and have service on your vehicle, you get a survey. So those are touch point surveys. They give you really good data in these touch points with those residents, and that's valuable. It tells you what you can be tweaking and doing better from a service perspective. Back to the sort of reputation management aspect, you're not going to go to a restaurant without checking the reviews first. Same for hotels. It's true in the apartment industry now. So we have to be certain that our residents are satisfied and we are intentionally reaching out and asking for those surveys, asking for those posts, because if you don't, the criticism is what goes out. People are very quick to criticize, very slow to compliment. So that has become a very important and ingrained aspect of our business to control perceptions of residents and prospects, because that perception is everyone's reality. That will affect your brand, that will affect your occupancy, your rent, more so than ever before. Even more important than what amenities you might have in your building. Be proactive around how to garner a positive culture at the property beyond anything else, because that absolutely impacts you. One of the most important things we do for our owners is to be their stewards and guiding them on what is important to residents. However, comp analysis is more valuable than a survey. You're going to see what are the other buildings in that particular competitive set, what do they offer, and you can measure the popularity of that by virtue of where their rents are situated, how full those buildings are, and that's probably the best tool for determining what is it that prospects and residents are seeking.
You use the word perception, right? As you're talking about getting this feedback from residents,
Mhm.
because it's their perception. But like you were saying, for prospects and for people reading that feedback, that's their reality, right?
That's exactly right. It's powerful.
You really can't dismiss that. You can't discount that.
I've learned a lot recently about the power of that. You can't also have everything be sunshine and roses. There needs to be authenticity, meaning there will be negative feedback. And so, how do you deal with that negative feedback? How quickly are you responding? That's even more valuable than not having any negative reviews.
We know that residents and prospects have expectations, right? They will always let you know what they are. And investors also have expectations, things like high occupancy, renewals, strong ROI. So, how do you manage that on both sides?
On the investor side, it's easier. It's a return on investment analysis. What is your investment strategy? It's not only looking at what is your goal, Mr. or Mrs. Investor? How quickly do you want to get this leased up? What's the target on the revenue side? Is that a realistic expectation? All of that is essentially going to instruct, what is it that makes sense for the building? And it's purely a return on investment. So that's super important to understand upfront to set and manage. And if they tell you we're a merchant builder, we want to get this thing leased up as quickly as possible and then sell it, then we might give them a different piece of advice. If it's going to take longer for that ROI to hit, if you're doing the value add play, now in that case, it could be proof of concept. You could say, this is a really great thing to do. It's going to cost you up front. So it will help you from the standpoint of residual value, but maybe not cash flow. Assume it's going to add X in value so that you can sell it for a higher number. And then it's for the next person to benefit from a cash flow perspective. So if a prospect or the renter is saying, we have to have granite countertops, and everybody else in the marketplace has granite countertops, that's kind of an easy one, right? If you're going to stay competitive, you've got to also do that. If they're saying we have to have all stainless steel appliances, the prospects are saying this, and the market is a combination of things. So then for the investor, it's a question of what is the value of that? If it's going to cost us $500 more a unit to put this in, how much more rent am I going to get over what period of time? So if you can get a 2 to 3 year return and that investor is looking for a hold beyond that, then that's going to make economic sense. It's going to get a higher rent. It's going to get the building leased up more quickly. So that's very simple. You could apply that formula to just about anything. When a resident or a prospect saying we've got to have X, that resonates with an investor. The biggest challenge operators have with developers and investors is convincing them not to impose their own personal views and personal beliefs on the market. The market must dictate, and that is something we always stress to set and manage the expectation of investors and lenders. When it comes to the prospect and the renter, sometimes it is a little bit more on emotion. What we try to do as sort of the intermediary is to create a list of wants and a list of wishes, right? We have a wish list. We can still rent the building. We can still get it full. It might take a little longer, maybe at a little lower rent, but they are saying they want X and this, let's put this on a wish list. And so that's a matter of managing that expectation with the renter. So throw out an example of some kind of a request that a renter might want. Like if you're going to rent in a building and you want something you don't see elsewhere, what could that be? Anything come to mind that you don't typically see at apartment communities? Can you
Oh
think
my
of
gosh.
anything? Yeah.
A sauna.
Sauna. That's a great one. Okay. Let's even say they want it in their unit, right? We're going extreme here. Or it could be in the community amenity space. It is unusual to have a sauna. That would be the first question. How bad will this prevent you from renting an apartment here? That is a need and a want. I'm not doing it otherwise. If it's, I really wish I had that, our next question would be, well, that's not typical and ordinary in the market. As you can see, we love your idea. We'll go make a recommendation. How much more rent would you pay to have a sauna? And then again, it brings it all back to really a valuation analysis, that cost benefit, and that resonates with the owner. And you never say no to that prospect. That is really how we balance and set and manage expectations successfully without telling anyone they're wrong, without maybe turning someone off to us, because I think you've always got to be focused on great customer service. They're always right, even when they're not.
Absolutely, Diane. I mean, you haven't told me no yet, so I'm expecting, you know.
You're going to get a sauna if you'll pay another $100 a month in rent. Yeah,
It's still a possibility, right? It's leaving it open like that and not just giving like that
exactly.
firm. Wow, that's great. The thing that came to mind, I'm like, of all the things, I'm like,
Put you
this
on the
one.
spot there. I mean, you must really like saunas.
I do. I do. Diane, what about when you're working with developers who have strong ideas, right? Or things that they kind of really want to stick to, and they kind of expect them to pan out, but they might not have as much experience in the market. So then how do you handle that, and how do you manage those expectations around ideas that might not pan out the way that they expect them to?
Especially if you have maybe first or second time developers of multifamily. They may be in other asset classes, and so they're accustomed to something different. And they may bring to the table the notion of if you build it, they will come. It's if you do something new and no one's ever done it before, and we're certain it's going to get $500 more a month in rent, you're going to lease the building up like crazy. And so to sort of dispel the notion that they are creating the next best thing and have it connected to analytics and data and what we know as a 100-plus-year-old company, that can be challenging. And so again, it's not saying no, but saying interesting idea. Here's been our experience when we've done something similar, and maybe try this instead. Now, sometimes you'll get them to acquiesce, and sometimes it'll be very firm. And then again, we've got to manage that expectation of if you want to do that, it'll be a little slower lease up. It'll be smaller portion of the market that we'll have to intentionally go outreach, and just be prepared that it will be a little more conservative in the underwriting. And you'll see whether or not you're successful in that. Developers are dreamers, and they have these fantastic ideas that are wildly successful. But I would say many don't, and have made commitments to investors and lenders. They're on the hook, and they want to do everything they can to try to accomplish that. The earlier we are involved in a process, the more we can bring to the table consulting and advising. And then they don't necessarily find themselves over their skis and then trying to dig their way out. But it does happen because there's a lot of money out there investing in deals and wanting to be in the space. But you have to be thoughtful in what you do and listening to the market and adapting, and while still making money for your investors. So that's super important to understand upfront, to set and manage.
It can definitely be tricky, right? Especially if you want to adapt, you want to innovate, but also you want to stick with what works, right?
That's exactly right.
If you've ever had to make a tough call with an investor or an owner, can you say how that played out for you and how you were able to justify the recommendation that you made?
So, an example of that might be as a third party operator, we may be partnering with an owner to help them lease up a building or effectuate an investment strategy or what have you. We're maybe midway through, the market turns, things aren't going as well as anybody thought. You can't predict it. And then all of a sudden, the margins thin out for the investors, right? And so, as a management partner, one of the tough decisions we made is a perfect example because this didn't happen too long ago, where we sort of looked at our margins. And in the property management business, you don't make that much money. Frankly, it's really a scale play. The more units you have, the more profitable it is. And so we're always in it for the relationship and the long term vision of that relationship. So we looked at our margins wherever we had any, like it could have been razor thin. And we just slashed them, and we said, listen, we're going to put skin in the game, even though we're not an owner, but we're going to thin out our margins so that you can be successful, or at least closer to success. Help you get to the end game of selling the asset, which was the case here. And then, you know what? We'll share on the upside a little bit. We'll take the hit now. That was a tough decision because it was unusual. We hadn't done that before. And they were thrilled, right, that we actually were making it easier for them. They were able to improve returns to their investors, which helps them long term do more deals. That was a tough decision because it hurt the company short term, but it paid off long term because they did more. They did another deal, and then they referred another customer. So to me, that's integrity, right? That's like, we're not in it just for a quick buck, we're in it for the long haul. Now, go to the other part of this question, which is really helping an owner or developer make a tough decision that later they're counting on what you're telling them to enable them to kind of like have that decision pay off, that's where we act as a steward more than really actually having it impact our bottom line. We may come in and they have in their underwriting maybe just like bare bones because they're worried about spending the money. They may not feel the return is there. We know the market maybe better, and we know that what they're doing is not going to get the result they want long term. So we may push them and say, let's say they have 20,000 a unit budgeted, and it might be 25,000, 28,000 a unit to get those upgrades that the market is demanding. Not that Village Green thinks is right. We will push them, it will hurt them, and we'll be nervous too because they may come back and go, you were wrong. And what are you going to do about it? It's really a very risky thing to do. In this case, it worked, right? We pushed them toward what the market wanted. They spent more money. Maybe the returns weren't as great, but they were able to sell the asset for a higher number because they had proof of concept. So they only had to do 25% of the property rather than 50% of the property to show the value. And there was more, meat on the bone for the next buyer.
That ties back to what you said, right? Let the market dictate, not Village Green, the developer or the investor, but the
Yeah,
market.
yes. Unfortunately, we're seeing a time now in our industry where there are failed deals. I think when there aren't well thought out strategies or there's so much money just wanting to do deals, it's short term gratification and long term pain. So we're seeing some of that in the market now.
In that example, the last one that you shared, it was a little bit of a risk, right? You were looking at the big picture, and that's what you were communicating to them. Obviously, Diane, you're the CEO, so you have many portfolios that you're analyzing and managing and talking to different developers and investors, and then also having to walk them through the different risks, financial, operational, whatever it may be. Does anything come to mind as far as a risk that you think on the ground property managers underestimate?
I wholeheartedly believe they underestimate the reputation risk. And it is a tough position to be on site. You're juggling the priorities of multiple stakeholders. And if you are quick to discount the value of that customer experience and the impact of that feedback to the reputation of the property, if you're not taking good care of it, if curb appeal is not there, the whole concept of everything speaks, the way someone's treated when they walk in the door, the way the apartment looks when they move in, people begin renewing from the moment they move in. And so the value of customer service at every touch point and the impact of reputation, social media I mentioned earlier, but there are so many other ways that your impact could be damaged. A curb appeal is another really big one that I do think on the ground it's discounted. We're so busy that they lose sight of the basics and what's important. It was different when I was on site. We would get up, first thing we did was we'd walk the property. We talked to the residents. We knew all their names. We knew the names of their children, their pet, what have you. And if something was on the ground, we'd bend over and pick it up. We didn't have the pressure of all the different tools, all the different reporting packages, all the different, again, stakeholders. It's really mushroomed for our people on site today. So there's so many demands on them. I think we as leaders of the companies need to figure out ways to help them through centralization, automation, and streamlining to enable them to get out from behind those desks and do exactly what I'm describing to you, because that is a very big risk and that damage is really difficult to quantify, but it does impact you and the property.
The curb appeal you mentioned as being one that's discounted. And really, I can see that as they have more reports and more work to do at their desks that would be pushed aside.
Well, that's the narrative, right? If you don't stay on top of that, the customer complaints grow. So I do think it's a downward spiral or domino effect that can very easily get out of control if you allow it to. Sometimes people prefer not to have human interaction. It's easier not to. So you go to, I'm going to work on the things that really aren't going to bring me much stress. So I'm going to sit here and close the door and work on a report. You don't want to discount how hard people work on site because I do think they have the hardest jobs. But I will say that, again, the onus is on those leading the companies to figure out how to make it easier for them and also to reinforce that behavior by virtue of us being out there ourselves, which I do a lot. I think it's super important for any company executive to be in the field more than sitting behind their desk, or you're not going to understand the market, the people. I don't know if you've ever read any of Malcolm Gladwell's books, Tipping Points. So I think if you think about social epidemics and how things start and then they just kind of spiral and grow and it becomes the norm rather than the exception. I've seen a lot of that happening in our world since the pandemic and trying to understand what is here to stay versus what is temporary. And as executives and leaders of any company, not just the multifamily industry, it's incumbent on us to really understand what is really here and sticking in our world today that we have to solve for and lead in that environment and don't resist and don't think, oh, it's temporary. Certain things are never going back to what they were. I'm passionate about the concept of, just really understanding what are those risks, not reading about it, not speculating on it, but actually getting out there and really fully understanding it.
I can tell you're very passionate and also about nurturing that too, right? Across your company, nurturing that culture of our reputation is important. And all of these different areas are contributing to it. Curb appeal, how the unit appears when the prospect walks in, just really emphasizing that, right? So that you don't
Mhm.
fall behind on managing the reputation and then it can spiral if you're not.
That's right. What is your brand? Ask yourself that question every day and decide what's your brand, your personal brand, the property brand, the company brand, and then everything ought to reinforce that.
Diane, we're having such a great conversation, and I'm so glad that you're sharing your insights with us. Now, we were talking a lot about investors, right? We're providing these recommendations, and you're advising them and bringing them information that they don't have to rely on and to say, okay, here's how you should tweak your plan, maybe according to this particular trend or this particular need. Um,
Mhm.
and so, if we keep talking about investors and the conversations that you're having with them, what are you hearing that's different from, say, 5 years ago?
Let me start by saying I think having been an owner operator enables us to ask questions, right, that other operators probably wouldn't think to ask, knowing like what their sensitivities might be. And it brings value to them to know that we can come there and guide having been in their shoes, right? What we're hearing different today from what we've heard before, there is this reputation of developers in general of having a herd mentality of, okay, everybody's going to the smile and we're all going to invest there and we're not going to go anywhere else. We're starting to see people more and more want to differentiate because there is a lot of money. I'll stress that real estate has always been a great investment, and the multifamily space has absolutely become the preferred asset class. That hasn't always been the case. It is now. And I think more novice developers and owners that are really looking for guidance there. And as opposed to having that, I want to go to this high growth employment market that's always having population growth. Markets like Texas, for example, um, Florida, and we're seeing more interest in secondary and tertiary markets, and we're seeing shorter hold periods. And that is by virtue of what's going on in the capital markets. That's really shifted the tide in terms of the interest and then how long they're going to hold. The risk profile has increased as a result of that. And I would say that's probably the most powerful of them is the lack of this herd mentality and more of, I want to carve out how I can differentiate, attract money, and have higher returns. So getting a little bit more creative there is what I'm seeing and hearing.
Wow, that's interesting. They're sort of getting away from that, right?
There are more people in it and creating more of that diversity of what is our business plan, and then who's at the table and what have we committed to them. More or less, that drives and instructs how that money is going to get invested.
So they're tailoring their strategy more than
That's
maybe
right.
than before. If we're thinking about how renters' expectations are going to change and things that might come with the next wave of renters, what do you think are some of those things that will surprise owners?
More than ever, we're seeing renters by choice and a much more diverse resident profile within a community. It used to be more prevalent to have a particular asset class attract a particular resident demographic and profile. Now that renting by choice is more popular, either because of the fact that rates are too high for people to afford to buy, more stringent regulatory requirements around lending, which is a good thing, by the way, and the desire to have experience versus owning real estate among the younger demographic, we're going to see more of that, I would say, blending of demographic profiles within communities, where somewhat of a barbell effect, you may have heard that term before, on, where is the greatest growth in our population? It's the younger and then the empty nester, and in the middle is sort of shrinking. We're seeing this very much in the BFR communities, where there are renters by choice, the empty nesters leaving their larger homes, and then the younger demographic, either young families that don't want to buy a home or can't yet buy a home in the same community, but wanting social programs around, what they think is important, right? So these are communities where the owners and the managers have to think about, how do we blend these very different demographics and give them that sort of environment that they're looking for and will be expecting. Programming becomes even more important. I would say pets are also getting even more important than they ever were. You can't reject pets anywhere any longer. You can maybe have certain limitations around them, but having programming around pets has become more and more important. They're family members. Those are a couple of the shifts we're seeing. Investors need to think more about, how do we solve for that conundrum of how you keep everybody happy, living together, feeling like this community is for me and isn't segregated for one group or another. And that can be done. It just takes a little bit more intentional planning.
Having
Right.
that kind of more distinctly dual resident base, and then you really have to cater to both. You said like both ends, and how do you have programming that really does cater to everyone?
And touch points, they're very different. To some extent, the older demographic is high touch point. They want a person, a human to deal with, and they want a quick turnaround of response when they've reached out and they want to talk to you. Whereas the younger demographic may not want to interact with any human at all, other than if they've got work that needs to be done in their apartment. So, how do you blend the two and really have sufficient empathy around how they want to be treated? And in both cases, they do want to feel like they're part of a community and they belong. Staffing a community like that is also challenging. Who do you put there and how do they adapt? So that's also got to be really well thought out.
You really will have to put a lot of thought into the decisions you're making at those communities. I always ask this closing question: what's an act of kindness that has stuck with you?
First, thank you for that question. Our world is very different from just focusing on kindness. I think that's super important. So, thank you for that. Our mission statement is centered around authentic experiences. And so, what does that do? It generates people doing special things and then sharing it with me, which I really love. We have an intranet where we ask people to just submit an authentic experience or some feedback. So, I read one a couple weeks ago. It was one of our service technicians at one of our properties. It was a high rise, where you have the trash chute and it goes down into the receptacle. Like, it's just a massive undertaking. A resident at the community came into the office crying. She had lost her engagement ring. It had come off her finger when she was tossing trash, and she was so beside herself, so upset. And, what could you do? Like, help her file an insurance claim. But to just imagine trying to filter through trash a large sort of compactor in a 19-floor building. I got a picture of our service tech inside that trash receptacle, and he found her ring.
Wow.
Now, no one asked him to do it. He found her ring, of course, cleaned it off and delivered it to her. And she sent me an email about it. And I was so blown away. I obviously reached out to him and thanked him. I think about Maya Angelou's words about people are not going to remember what you said, they're not going to remember what you did, but they're going to remember how you made them feel. And that's how I want to run this company. That's the example I want to set. That touched my heart. It made me feel like all the effort that went into creating a culture here, all the heartache that went into shifting something that was very different before, it was so worth it in that moment. It just felt so gratifying. And that really stuck with me.
That is a good one, Diane.
To me, it's like delivering authentic experiences in the moment that lead to stories people want to share. That's our mission statement. It sounds really aspirational, but it's achievable if you just put a mindset every day of, I want to be remembered today in a way that will make people feel good and touch their heart and know that there is kindness in the world. It's worth it to put that out there. I really thank you for the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And if nothing else, put that message out there of please put out kindness and it will come back tenfold. I'm living proof of that.
And just imagine, like you said, the impact of that, right?
Yes, she couldn't believe it. That is what builds relationships. That resident will likely renew her lease. It's great to be kind, but there's also a business case around it to do that and to run companies that way.
That is a great note to end on, Diane. Thank you so much for chatting with me. I know we could keep going.
Well, let's go hang out in the sauna and do it, okay? We'll take this little glass of wine, a sauna, and just really relax. It's been a long week, so it's been a pleasure wrapping it up. Thank you for the time.
Thank you for making time, Diane. I really
My
do
pleasure.
appreciate it. And your perspective is really valuable. And I'm so glad you're able to share it with our audience. And thank you, everyone, for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate it and subscribe to our channel. Thank you. And we'll see you next time.